About 15 years ago, I had a little bitty contract here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where I live, and I was just starting out my company. I was having a tough time, and the folks that I was working for basically told me that they had a counterpart down in Houston. And so basically all I had to do was go down, and I could probably get another contract with them. They were a much bigger organization down in Houston. So I called the lady on the phone down in Houston, and she was kind enough to set up an appointment to visit with me. And then of course I'm broke. I mean, I barely had, I was totally in debt and everything because I'd spent everything I could to kind of get my company started. And I ended up driving down to Houston. And the whole way down there, I'm excited because I'm thinking about all the different possibilities with this new contract, because the company that I was working, the organization I was working for in Fort Worth had about 300 people or so fairly small, didn't have a whole lot of opportunity there. But the one down in Houston had thousands of people, so this could turn into a really big contract over an extended period of time. So I was very excited about it. And I had a great in, and so I'm excited, and it's about a 5-hour drive. So, the longer I'm going, the more excited I get and everything. And I left early in the morning, had a 1 o'clock appointment. I was excited about visiting with this person, and the lady's name was Susan. So Susan finally called me into her office, and very stoic kind of person. Very nice, by the way, but very stoic. Susan kind of let me do my pitch, which I had practiced 150 times in the 5.5-hour car drive going down there. I gave my pitch to her, and I looked at her, and she just kind of paused for a second, and it was a long pause. It seemed like about 5 minutes, but it was probably only about 2 or 3 seconds. And she said, honestly, Doug, this looks really, really good. I hear what you're saying about how well you guys are doing up in Fort Worth, but this crowd down here in Houston is a little bit more sophisticated, and if they can't get a return on their investment for this type of training, then if they can't guarantee that, I'm not sure it's really going to work out. So maybe you should kind of go back to the drawing board. And I'm just shocked, because I practiced this pitch, I practiced this speech, for 5.5 hours. I was all excited, and she just got my whole balloon got deflated there. Just really feeling sorry for myself. I get back in the car now. It's it's about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Rush hour traffic in Houston. It takes me about an hour to get out of the Houston city limits and everything. I get all the way up to about Huntsville, which is about, maybe an hour or so away. And the whole time I'm in a pity party because I've just wasted, basically a day and a half of my life going driving down and getting ready for this sales call. And about just on the outside of Huntsville, I'm like I said, I'm really feeling sorry for myself. All of a sudden, in Texas we have really big things, This big bug flies right into my windshield and splat, right on the windshield, and it's right in my line of sight. I mean, right in my face. And so I'm saying, oh my God, what else could happen? This is like one of the worst days of my life, right? So I'm kind of driving, and I'm sitting here, and as I'm kind of thinking about the bug that's now on my windshield, I'm looking at all the weird kind of colors that are now spreading across my windshield, and all of a sudden I start to feel this thing. It's like a boom, 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 and I'm going, holy crap! I just ran off the road, right? So I kind of, weed back onto the road and everything, and I'm thinking, oh man, because my heart's kind of beating and everything, because I was getting kind of worried there for a second, and I'm driving down I bet I go another 10 miles or so, and all of a sudden I'm starting to see the bug guts are starting to kind of smear across the windshield and everything, and it's huge, right? And so basically I turn on my windshield wipers, and you know how they have the mister that kind of sprays out of the windshield wiper. So I hit the mister. That just made it worse. They just smeared everything. So now instead of having a bug guts about this side, it's like taking up about a foot or so in front of me. And now I'm kind of looking around this thing, and the whole time I'm kind of looking around this, all of a sudden I'm starting to hear the boom, 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 boom again, because I'm off the road. And and by the way, I'm about maybe 5 miles out of Huntsville, and it's another probably 70 miles to get to a convenience store, the next major exit where there's someplace where I can kind of stop with a squeegee that I can get this off. And so I kind of tough it out, but for the next 70 miles, for the next hour or so, about every 5-10 minutes or so, I'm hearing that same boom, 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 because I'm kind of running off the road, and I kind of start to laugh after a while, because I'm starting to what kind of hit me is that I was focused more on that obstacle that was in front of me. I was focused more on the bug guts than I was on the kind of destination where I was going, right? And so I ended up getting to the next convenience store, kind of squeegeeing off the window and everything, and it hit me. I mean, it was like as soon as the windshield was kind of free or clear, the clouds kind of parted, and it kind of hit me that that's exactly what I'd been doing when I was in Houston. I was focusing more on the obstacle that was in my way versus the destination of where I wanted to go. And I was thinking, okay, what exactly did Susan say? She said that this was a sophisticated group. She said that they needed a return on their investment, right? So if I can give them that, she will probably say yes, right? So I get back to my house the whole time, the rest of the trip now, I'm kind of focusing as I'm driving, I'm focusing on how do I get a return on investment. At the time I was doing leadership training, which was a very soft skills type thing, confidence and people skills and how to motivate and inspire people and that kind of thing. Which, by the way, folks would go through the classes and they would rave about how great it was and how it was a life-changing event, but it was kind of hard to put a kind of dollar value on that, right? So basically what I kind of organized was I knew that there's one session in the leadership class. It was a 6-week leadership class at the time. There was one session on problem solving, and I thought, well, that's would be the opportunity to really have a return on investment, because if we can help people solve real life problems in that problem solving session, which we would, and if we could get that documented, we could put a return on investment. So basically what I did was I organized a leadership class down in Houston, with people that Susan would probably know. And it took me about, I don't know, maybe 2 months or so to kind of organize the class. I went in, I did 6 weeks, I'm going down and teaching the class and coming back, teaching the class and coming back, teaching the class and coming back. About the 4th or 5th week, we started getting results from those problem-solving processes, and by the 6th week, the numbers had really started to skyrocket. There was one particular group in that 6-week class that was from a big construction company who Susan was very familiar with. And the return on investment that they said that they got out of this one session of the leadership class was, it actually totaled up to be over $1 million, because they had 8 of their executives in the class. And so basically I had the vice president of that company sign a document that said, hey, this is the results of this class were this dollar amount, and I took that back to Susan on my way out of town after the 6th class was over. I dropped by her office. I said, okay, I understood exactly what you were talking about. Would this help? And I kind of gave her the piece of paper, some guy that she knew, saying that there was a big return on investment. She said, that can't hurt, right? So anyway, that was kind of the start of the relationship that I had with Susan at that association. And for the next year or so, I taught about 3 or 4 classes for them the first year, and the second year I taught about 5 or 6, and the third year I taught 8. By the time I hit that 3rd year, I'd gone from basically a few $1,000s a year to about $250,000 in a contract, and it was all because I just stopped focusing on the bug guts, right? That's one of the big things that happens to us in business, is that we really have to be kind of visionary. We have to see where we're going. What's the destination that we're trying to get to, and then focus on getting to that destination. There can be all kinds of problems that kind of pop up along the way, but we have to be able to kind of deal with them. I remember back when I was first, I was in college, and I was going to business school because I wanted to own my own business. I wanted to be an entrepreneur, right? And my dad, who was an entrepreneur through most of my adolescence, kind of was giving me some advice, and he was giving me some self-help books and positive things to kind of help me. At the time, he lived in Little Rock, Arkansas. I lived in West Texas, and so he found a business conference that was going on in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and we kind of met up. He drove in from Little Rock, and I drove in from Fort Worth, and it was basically a bunch of motivational speakers, which was kind of fun and kind of interesting and everything. But I remember there was one specific speaker that came on stage, and by the way, this was my first experience with keynote speaking or motivational speaking, anything like that. And I could see that these people who were on stage were very successful. They were very powerful. And so I was basically believing anything that they said, right? Well, one of the guys got up and he was talking about this Yale study that was done back in the 50s. And basically what he said was that in the 50s, Yale had done surveys with their graduates and asked how many of them had specific goals set. And what they figured out was that after 30 years, they went back and surveyed those folks one more time to see what their success level was, how much money were each one of them making, right? And what they figured out was that the 10% that had specific goals had actually accomplished more financially than the other 90% combined. And the 3%, there was only 3% that had written goals. And the folks that had written down those specific goals had actually accomplished more than the other 97% combined, right? Well, I'm listening to this. I'm like 20 years old. I'm sitting here eating all this up. I'm writing, and by the way, I'm taking down tons of notes. I said, okay, great. All I have to do is just kind of write down my goals, write down my vision, right? So I pulled out a new sheet of paper. I had a big notebook, and I pulled out a sheet of paper. And I said, okay, so Doug's long-term goals, right? I wrote down, it was about a dozen or so things. And some of the things that I wrote down, by the way, the very first thing that I wrote down was I wanted to earn $1 million by the time I was 30. Right, gave me about a decade or so to earn that $1 million. I wrote that. That was number one. The second thing is I like to travel a lot, so I wrote down that I wanted to visit every one of the 50 states. And then I was thinking, well, might want to get outside the United States as well. So I wrote down that I wanted to visit every country in Europe, and I scratched it out because at the time it was the Soviet Union was still in power. Quite a bit anyway. The Berlin Wall just come down and everything. So I scratched that and I said, okay, Western Europe. I want to see every country. I want to visit every country in Western Europe. And I was thinking, okay, well, I want to have some friends too and family. And so I want to have a beautiful wife. Beautiful and smart wife, and I want to have 2 kids. The reason I want to have 2 kids is because I'm the middle child. I have an older sister and a younger brother, and my little brother got screwed. By the time that my little brother came around, my parents were so wore out that he got nothing compared to my sister and I. So I think maybe we should stop at 2. So I got 2 kids and everything, right? So I was thinking, okay, so what about I got to be able to drive something, right? And I remember at the time I wrote down that my dream car was a Ford Explorer. Right, I wrote down the Ford Explorer because at the time that would be the pinnacle of success was to have a Ford Explorer. And there were probably a few more things that I kind of wrote down along the way. But those were the ones that I kind of remembered later on. The reason why I remember this is because I took that notebook since I was taking notes feverishly at this seminar. I kind of put that notebook in a drawer in my desk, and I moved around 3, 4, 5 times in the next probably decade or so. And about 10 years later, I was about 30 years old, and I pulled that out. I pulled that notepad out, and started looking at it, and to see how many of those things that basically I'd forgotten all about it, but I started looking at it. By that time, I was married to a wonderful woman, basically from Ireland, from Dublin, Ireland, which was kind of cool because I said that I wanted to visit a lot of countries in Western Europe, and since she's from Dublin, Ireland, she goes back to visit her folks pretty much every year, and I go with her, and every time we go, we visit someplace new. So we'll leave the kids with the grandparents, and we'll kind of hop over to England or Scotland or Rome, Italy, that kind of thing. So we've done that, and so I visited quite a few. The other thing is that one of the other things that I said that I wrote down was I wanted to be my own boss, I wanted to own my own business, and very early on, when I was, I figured out that I was in corporate America. I loved working in corporate America though, but I really wanted the freedom, and so I ended up becoming a sales rep and doing my own thing. And so as a sales rep, I was basically an entrepreneur. I owned my own business, and eventually I started the Leaders Institute and was basically running everything. So so basically what I started figuring out was that all these things that were on that list were starting to come true. There were a few things that I was a little off on. Like for instance, I said I wanted to make $1 million. I should have said I wanted to be a millionaire by the time I was 30, but I kind of screwed up. I said I wanted to make $1 million. Well, it took me, I think I was 34, I believe, when I made the first $1 million before the end of the year. So in a year anyway. But the interesting thing was that I made the second $1 million within 6 months. So it took me about 12 years or so to make that first $1 million, but it took me about 6 months to make the second one, right? So, but what was interesting though is that what I figured out later on, because since I've been doing training and speaking for so long, I was thinking, God, that was such a powerful study. That Yale study was so powerful in my life that I wanted to be able to quote it. I wanted to be able to quote it verbatim. I wanted to go back to this thing, and I went back and I've looked for years. Never in my life have I found that study at all. Basically, apparently, it's just made up. That study never happened. Nobody ever did that research at Yale, right? And what I kind of figured out was that a lot of times anytime you hear a motivational speaker on the stage saying, a Harvard study or a Yale study, you can pretty much discount everything that they say from that point on as far as that goes. But the thing was that I believed it. It helped me create a vision in my head of where I wanted to go, and it helped me kind of get there along the way. And so even though the study is probably fake, even though the study never really happened, the results of that study are somewhat true. The vision that we have can be very, very powerful in helping us get to that next level of success, whatever it is that we want to go. Now, just having a vision is not going to get you there, by the way, because I didn't, even though I wrote all those things down, none of those things happened immediately. Most of those things took me years of persistent action, of persistent goal setting to kind of get. For instance, on the monetary value thing, I wanted to make $1 million. Well, I didn't start out that way. I was making, at the time I wrote that thing down, I was making about $1,700 a month, right? So, but once I got my first job in sales, I really struggled for about the first year or so, first couple of years really. I did okay, but I wasn't getting wealthy. And what I kind of figured out was that the same thing that had helped me kind of get into sales would help me become successful at sales, that goal setting that I really needed. And what I started doing was I started putting just a piece of paper up, and I basically asking myself, the questions that we ask ourselves can be very helpful in getting us to that next level. And I just put a question on the piece of paper. I said, how can I make $300 today? And the reason why I chose $300 is because that thing that I was selling at the time had a $200 commission. So, and it was fairly easy for me to sell one of those things in a day. I didn't sell one every day, but it was fairly easy for me to sell one. But selling two every day? That was a little stretch for me at the time, right? So how can I make $300 today, right? And what I started figuring out was that just by me asking that question, just having that in front of me when I was on the phone with a customer, or when I was at a customer's office, that kind of thing, I asked more questions. By the way, do you need a second one of these, right? And more often than not, well, not every time, but more often than in the past anyway, I was able to sell 2, 3 of these things, right? So basically, after I got pretty good at making $300-400 a day, I just changed it. Said, how can I make $500 a day? And then how can I make $1,000 a day? And eventually I got to the point where, how can I make $5,000 a day? And then about 3 or 4 years later, it just kept increasing it, right? Eventually I got to the point where I wrote on the piece of paper, how can I make $50,000 today, right? And over the last, I don't know, maybe 2, 3, 4, or 5 years or so, I've made sometimes 2, 3, 4 times that much in a day. But it's all because I kept pushing myself. So those goals are very, very important in helping us get there along the way. Now, the specific, whatever you focus on, one of the things that we kind of figured out was that whatever you focus on, you get more of, right? For instance, my background is in coaching, leadership coaching, presentation skills, public speaking, how to help people overcome public speaking fear, that kind of thing. What I figured out very early on in coaching individuals is that if I tell them what they're doing wrong, they just do it more. So if I tell somebody to stop saying if I tell somebody to take their hands out of their pants or their pants pocket, that kind of thing, they're just going to do more of that, right? So instead, I started finding out what they were doing well. And if the more that I focused on what they were doing well, the more everything else just kind of fell by the wayside. It's the same with our goals as well. I give you a good example of this. One of the companies that I own does a lot of team building events. We do a lot of really cool, high energy team building events for big companies. And one of the things that we've kind of specialized in is doing philanthropic team building events. Basically, we get corporate America will hire us to come in and do 2 hours of team building, and at the end of it, we'll be donating something, or they will be donating something to charity. And one of the really cool ones that we do is the one that we call the ACE race. And what we do is we make a miniature golf course, like a putt-putt course, out of food items. So basically, we put felt on the floor, and we put together, we give them things like canned goods and macaroni and cheese boxes and that kind of thing. And all they have to do is get really creative to kind of set up each one of these golf course holes, these mini golf holes, and then they get to play it, right? So it's a kind of a competition. It's really fun. When it's all over, we pack up all the food items into boxes. We donate it to one of the local food banks. It's very, very popular up in the Northeast, especially where flooding has occurred recently, that kind of thing. Anyway, so I'm at one of these ACE race events, and it was really funny because one of the teams had set up, it's basically a 3-foot by 9-foot area, and there's at the very front of it there's a tee, right? So you kind of put into the hole, right? And they had pretty much put a narrow kind of tunnel that, as long as somebody kind of hit it fairly straight, it would go right into the hole. Very, very easy. In fact, one of the easiest holes I've ever seen. It doesn't take a whole lot of skill to putt something straight, maybe 8 feet or so, right? what they did to make it challenging though is they took one of the cans, one of the the canned goods, and they set it right down in the middle of the tunnel, right? And I was sitting here watching this for a good probably 10 or 15 minutes, and it was, I bet there were no fewer than 30 people in a row that would start to put, and they would hit that can dead on, and it would bounce off. And the thing is, since it's a team building event, they have to take turns. And so one person would go, they'd hit the can, they'd have to pick up the ball, another person would go, second person would go, they'd hit the can, third person would go, they'd hit the can, fourth person would go. And I'm sitting here going, what in the world? What is happening here? What's going on? Why in the world do they keep hitting the can? And what I kind of figured out was that that's what they're focused on. They're focused on not hitting the can. If you focus on not hitting the can, you're going to hit the can, right? So basically I went up and kind of, I leaned over the next person who was going to go. I leaned over her shoulder and I said, instead of looking at the can, look at the hole. You know, basically what they were doing in that example or in that situation was they were looking at the bug guts, right? Instead of looking at the destination, they were looking at the obstacle, not where they wanted to get to. I said, don't even, pretend the can's not even there and just focus on the hole, right? And boom, she hit it, nailed it right there. Person that never picked up a golf club in her life, but she was one of the first people to make it through that hole. And from then on, it was fairly easy. You know, instead of 20 or 30 people in a row, now about every other one was hitting it right into the hole. So it's all about our focus. It's all about the goal. The goals that we set, those individual goals, help us keep focused to get to that vision that we've kind of created. I bet I was probably 26 years old or so. I lived in an apartment complex, and it wasn't the best part of town, but I just moved to the big city, just about to buy my first house and everything, just starting to make it and everything. And when there was a big rainstorm that hit the night before, and I came out, and there was a little pothole right by my car door when I was just about to get into the parking lot, and I kind of noticed that there was a little moth down there. It was kind of flapping around. And I didn't think much of it, I just thought, basically it was taking a bath or something, right? So I get in the car and I drive off, I go and I'm at work for, 8, 9, 10 hours or so. I come back, it's just about to get dark, and I look in the pothole, and what do I find? It's a dead moth, right? And I'm sitting here going, holy crap, I mean, like, what this moth, because the whole time, that probably 10 seconds or 15 seconds that I was watching him, he was really working. He was putting in a lot of effort. He was moving around in circles. He was going around. And I'm sitting here thinking, if he had just focused on one spot on the horizon and just focused in that direction and put out the same amount of effort that he put in maybe 10 seconds, he would have been out. But because he didn't have the goal, because he didn't have that focus, he just kind of spun around, and eventually died, right? And that's the way we are a lot of times in the business world, is that we kind of get so focused on the bug guts, we get so focused on the obstacles that we put out a lot of effort. We're working really, really, really hard, but we're just not getting anywhere, right? So we have to get that focus on the horizon, get that focus on where we want to go, and we're much more likely to get there. Set those incremental goals, get there, or set those incremental goals and you'll get there, right? Third thing, so after you have that vision is so important because you have to know where you're going. If you don't know where you're going, any road's going to get you there, right? The second thing is the goals. You have to have those individual goals that help you get there incrementally. Get to that vision incrementally, and over time, you'll kind of get to that vision, but you're not going to get there without some persistent action. So you have to have a persistent action in order to make those dreams come true, to make that vision occur. So you can set all the goals that you want, but if you never do anything, you're not going to get there, right? It's so funny. I get invited to speak at multi-level marketing events and that kind of thing. And what I tend to find is that there are so many of those kind of situations where people have these great dreams. They have this drive to go and accomplish something great, but then they never take any action, right? So basically they're always planning to do something. They're always planning to take that next step. They're always planning to have that success, and then eventually, 10 years go by, 15 years go by, 20 years go by, and they haven't moved, right? It's very similar to the moth, kind of moving around. You're still looking at the bug guts, right? So basically, you have to take that step-by-step action. So what I would encourage you to do is is to, at this point, just kind of think about where you want to be. Say 10 years. That's a good timeline, right? Where do I want to be 10 years from now? And in all aspects of your life, financially, spiritually, in your relationships and your friendships, that kind of thing. Where do you want to be? And set that goal, or create that vision, and then set those incremental goals to help you get to that vision. What can I do this year to help me get to that goal that I want to be at, that place that I want to be in 10 years? And then once you have that, what can I do this month? What can I do this week? And what can I do today? And make those constant actions a part of your routine. One of the things that I always teach salespeople to do when we do sales training, especially, and I've had a lot of success with this myself, is that you have to measure your activity. The activity isn't necessarily the most important part, because the vision is going to get you there. But you know, the biggest rule is that I tell people is that thou shalt not fool thyself, right? So it's very easy to for salespeople especially to think that they're working, to think that they're doing things that will get them to that success level, but in reality they're just kind of spinning around. It's kind of like my daughter. My daughter's 13. You know, if I ask her to clean up a room or ask her to clean up the garage or something like that, you know, I will hear a lot of activity, and I'll kind of pop in, but nothing's really gotten done, right? So, you know, it just because we're busy doesn't necessarily mean things are gonna be done. So, but one of the things that I used to do is create a time log, and I would say, what have I done this hour? What have I done this? And if you put it in like 15-minute increments, it's more difficult, but you probably won't have to do it more than a couple of days. But what did I do this 15? Every single thing that I did in the last 15 minutes, I'm gonna mark it down and keep an accurate calendar of that. And after about 2 or 3 days, go back and look. How many of those things that you've done, those activities that you've done, are getting you toward that goal, that are getting you toward that vision? Circle those, and you'll see. It should be a very eye-opening experience for you to kind of see how you're using your time and how you can better use that time. You don't have to work 50 hours, 100 hours a week if you're doing the right things, right? So you have to really focus on that thing. So I would encourage you, stop focusing on the bug guts. You know, pick that destination out that you want to get to, and then focus on the destination. Don't focus on the bug guts that are in front of you. If you do that, you can't help but be successful.